All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jillian Graber, Executive Director of Protect PT, and we are here today to talk about raising bonding amounts in Pennsylvania with Kelsey Krepps from Sierra Club. Kelsey, just want to give you a little intro. Kelsey Krepps, her pronouns. She was born and raised in northwestern Pennsylvania, just outside of Titusville, the birthplace of the oil industry. Throughout her undergraduate and graduate education, Kelsey focused on the environment and the history of Pennsylvania and other parts of Appalachia, knowing that understanding how we've gotten to where we are will play a key role in imagining and developing a sustainable world that doesn't rely on fossil fuels. So she has been with Sierra Club since March of 2020, and she's worked on fracking and liquefied natural gas LNG projects in eastern Pennsylvania, and she's a member and steward of the Progressive Workers Union. Kelsey currently lives in Pittsburgh with her husband Joey and their two dogs, Kona and Ivy. And so thanks for joining us again today, Kelsey. I know you were with us, February of last year?
Yeah, so thanks for having me back.
Yeah, and we were talking about this same subject last year, and so this is a kind of a momentous day as far as like the life of this campaign goes, and so we thought we'd give some updates. And so, Kelsey, can you talk about why today is important?
Yeah, so the month of July as a whole, and last year, during this time period is actually when some of our efforts to address this issue were stopped. And also, this past couple 2 weeks ago, actually, is when our efforts were officially halted. So there were some things in motion. Happy to get into those here and show some of that timeline just to give folks, that nice lay of the land and what we had done up until this point. But within the last year, there's really been some efforts, particularly to stop our efforts on this work with the conventional industry, or what we would call shallow gas industry.
Yeah, that's great. And so if we go to the next slide, yeah, we're going to talk about the timeline. So I'm going to move our little thing here so we can check it out.
No worries. Thanks. Yeah. So, as folks, when I was here the last time, so thanks again for having me back. It was February of last year, of 2022. And right before that, we had filed, we, as in Sierra Club, Clean Air Council, EarthWorks, Mountain Watershed Association, Penn Future, and Protect PT, had filed rulemaking petitions at the Environmental Quality Board in September, and those petitions were accepted for study in November. And so what that meant was the Environmental Quality Board had given DEP the permission to study our rulemaking petition asks and produce reports based off of those merits. And if those merits were well founded, it could have started a rulemaking process in Pennsylvania for us to raise bond amounts for conventional and unconventional or fracking oil and gas wells. So that is where we were at last time we spoke together. And like I said, things have changed. And in the last year alone, if we go to the next slide, apologies. This is the particular piece of what we had believed why the Environmental Quality Board was a means to start that rulemaking process and those petitions and filing there, as they would have been given the authority to do so. So this was prior, again, to February, and in July of last year, the legislature passed House Bill 2644, which is now on the books as Act 96, and that will show you on the next page here of just a timeline. The conventional petition was stopped. And so this is really interesting because this only stopped the conventional petition. This only was addressing the conventional shallow gas industry, and it doesn't stop bond amounts from being raised for forever. It's within a 10-year window. However, within that 10-year window, a lot of oil and gas operators could abandon their wells, which is primarily one of the reasons that we were trying to raise bond amounts, is to prevent abandonment. which abandonment really is just like not taking care of one's own assets and putting them back on Pennsylvanians to take care of. So yeah, we're July 19th to 2022. So we're looking at the year anniversary within the last week of that particular bill passing. It passed without Governor Wolf's signature, and that is part of this middle section here. It was allowed to become law, but it didn't have a signature. And part of that, of what Governor Wolf at the time addressed in a lapsing statement, was that he required a report from DEP with evaluations and recommendations regarding the oversight of the conventional industry. And that report got released in December, like over Christmas break. So it was kind of like snuck out there into the world. But this report really highlighted the fact that the conventional industry, one of their most frequent violations is well abandonment, which is where they try to put these things back on us. And obviously, we've had a switchover of governors in this time period. And so priorities have changed, and getting everything aligned in terms of, different regulatory agencies and bodies. DEP, after a few months of, switching up and transition period, DEP evaluated our petition, the conventional petition, not on its merits of raising bond amounts, but simply because Act 96 was on the books, and that meant that they could not, and the Environmental Quality Board was no longer an avenue for us to attempt to raise these bond amounts. And so officially, as of 2 weeks ago today, EQB denied our rulemaking petition because Act 96 exists. So this really has kind of halted a lot of our efforts for the conventional industry, but we are planning on pivoting. So I can just name that. That was a lot of timeline, so happy to answer any questions if there are some, or any comments.
Yeah, so I just added the link to the governor's report in the chat here for everybody that's watching live. It looks like we have a couple people watching live. And so, yeah, if folks have questions for Kelsey, please put it in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer the questions as they come up. And of course, the chat will be able to be accessed after this video. So for folks that are watching it later, and we'll have a way to get in contact with us later in case you missed this video live and want to see and get in touch with us afterward. So I just want to talk really quick. So when we talk about bonding, we're going to get into like what that means, right? Because and also I think we should talk a little bit about what conventional versus unconventional means too. So I think the next slide we're talking about, what about the fracking petition, right? And when we say fracking, we're taught and conventional or unconventional. Fracking means really unconventional. It's an unconventional way to access the layer, the shale layer, and access those gas pockets to be able to get the gas. So just wanted to make sure folks understand that lingo a little bit, because I think sometimes it can be a little crazy to try to navigate this lingo, and it's great that we have folks like Kelsey on to be able to help us understand a little bit better, because this is all really important content, but not content that a layman would really know, if they haven't watched an educational video like this. So just wanted to name that, and then if people have questions afterwards, they can let us know. Okay, so what about the fracking petition?
It's still in play. So we have not received any update on the timing where we might see that report come from DEP, but it has not been stopped by legislative action like the other petition has. The EQB is still able to raise bond amounts for frac wells according to the way that was separated out within Act 96. I will also share, Jillian, I really appreciate you naming the differences between these wells and the kind of language and industry language that gets thrown around a lot of the times. Pennsylvania is also, we have laws on the books that make us separate the industry out. So that's another one of these pieces of the puzzle, is that we actually have to do this just because there are laws that govern conventional industry versus laws that govern unconventional industry. And part of the reason that we submitted 2 different rulemaking petitions is to is to take care of that particular issue within our statute. So yeah, it's annoying to have to kind of de-lump gas industry overall, but that's how it's kind of regulated, and pieces of that are on our books that make us do that, force us to have separate rules.
I put a link or a note in the chat for our tech team on the back end, Corey and Kiara. It looks like our Facebook live stream isn't working, so just want to mention that. I'm not sure if we can repost that, but we will try to do that right now. And thank you to Sarah for letting us know that. I just put the HB 2644 link in the chat as well, and that's all good information. We're going to try to put all of the content in the chat that we can. That way, if folks want to follow up on any of these things, they certainly can. Okay, so now that we know like kind of the difference between unconventional and conventional and what that means, let's talk about what a bond means and what we talk about when we talk about bonding, right?
Right. Right, because as if, separating out wells by definition wasn't confusing enough, let's bring a thing called bonding into play. And so, yeah, again, where this is a lot of this is like getting into the weeds. And so the best way that I can describe a bond is sort of like a safety deposit. In order to get a permit to drill a well, an oil and gas a driller, they must deposit money with the state or provide a contract with a insurance company or a surety, so that the state knows that there's enough money to cover the cost of closing the well when it's no longer producing. So in this way, again, the security deposit mindset kind of comes into play. If you are renting a home apartment, you have to put down a security deposit that you eventually would get back at the end of your stay in that apartment or home if you chose to leave. If that security deposit is really low, for example, and this is why we're kind of talking about this idea of raising bond amounts. If that security deposit is too low, you're not going to treat the place that you're in as much of trying to keep it pristine, make sure there's no holes in the walls, like whatever things may happen, you're going to definitely try to get that money back at the end of your time there. I apologize. It's a little less incentive if it's too small of an amount. I apologize. To try to worry about that money. For example, if it's an $100 security deposit, maybe that's not something that you're going to be as worried about the scuffs on the floor when you leave as if your security deposit is $1,500. And that is a significant chunk of change. You may want to have that priority, put it back into something else in your life. A bond acts as a similar situation for an oil and gas well. It's capital that is frozen and is there for when the well needs to be plugged. The problem is that these amounts are nowhere near the real cost of what it costs to plug a well at the end of their lifespan. And we had an expert report done back before we filed the petitions that really got into like what bond amounts should be. And again, pennies in comparison, dollars in comparison to the thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars that it actually costs to plug each of these wells. So there's a little less incentive, and that's why we see a lot of things like abandonment happening at really high rates, because they don't have to take care of these things at the end of their lifespan. They also don't get enough money at the end to really do the plug job that's required. So that's where we come into this, why this whole thing is an issue, is that these wells end up being our problem. And they're our problem in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and if we go to the next slide, I mean, really, this cost of doing this business, the company makes money. They drill the well, they get the product to market, and then they just leave it abandoned or leave it to be in disrepair, which we have seen time and time again. And I also want to just mention that Pennsylvania has hundreds and thousands of conventional wells, and the number is growing by the day for unconventional, and so it sounds to me that just kind of in layman's terms that there's very little incentive for companies to maintain and take care of their well. And for them, if their goal is to drill, extract, and take the money and run, then it leaves Pennsylvanians with the cost to clean it up. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've become a part of their business model. We've become the part of their bottom line. And with a higher bond amount, we'd likely be able to avoid some of that. It would encourage a faster plugging of wells at the end of their lifespan versus having them sit there. You'd be getting that bond back, you'd be getting that surety back, you'd be freeing up that stored capital that you already put aside in a well if the bond amounts were higher. Like, again, they're way too low for us to really even consider them to be, worth even going after. And so the abandonment happens more frequently. But faster plugging also eliminates a lot of emissions. It also, the contamination window of things like benzene exposure, your carcinogen exposures, when you're plugging these things, you're having less of that time just sitting there, having that stuff go into our atmosphere and into our water supplies. You also eliminate the state responsibility and the fact that these wells would be added to our backlog of orphaned wells that we already have in the state of Pennsylvania because of our long history with fossil fuel extraction, particularly because we were the state that started with the oil industry. And another thing that higher bond amounts do is also just ensures the fact that if, for example, that well owner is still unable to take care of those wells at the end, they still abandon them to the state, despite the fact that they have this money set aside. That could be from bankruptcy. There are other financial situations that could be at play. That ensures that the state, that DEP, has enough money to take care of that well in full, not just in a piecemeal way, not in a dollars into the tens of thousands kind of way, but has enough money to significantly take care of that particular thing, just the particular well, despite the fact that they again, it just makes it less of a taxpayer issue. It still there's money set aside for it. Whether or not that still gets plugged in a timely manner is a different story, but at least there's money to be had to take care of that we're not paying for. And I think that comes back down to financial responsibility of this, as making sure that this doesn't come back down to us as everyday people. This doesn't come back down to us. It's not our responsibility. It's the driller's responsibility to have this money set aside. And if that goes to DEP to take care of, because that driller is still being responsible with it, that becomes a DEP. They have the means and the money. So
Yeah.
again, just making sure that's not our issue.
Yeah, and I think that anybody that lives in Pennsylvania, particularly Southwest Pennsylvania, where we've seen a history of mining, is really acutely aware of a previous industry going, many of which went bankrupt, these companies, and left our streams to be red with mine or like a bluish colored water with mine drainage. And so all of these things that we will never be able to clean up, this could happen again. And so and you were talking about benzene exposures. I'm not sure if folks know what benzene is, but it's a known carcinogen. It's harmful to human health. So this can be a real health impact for people that live near these wells. And we have some footage here for you in a couple minutes, but I just wanted to mention that because I think it's important for people to know that something that's in their backyard that could be leaking, that was abandoned, the efforts of folks like Kelsey and us at Protect BT and a number of other organizations, we're trying to change that, right? We're trying to protect Pennsylvanians and make it so it's much easier to clean this stuff up, and there's money set aside for it. So if we go to the next slide, I think this kind of digs in a little bit deeper. I'm going to move us again. So
yeah, I just wanted to let folks know that there were a couple of other things that were kind of important to note here. And I mentioned orphan wells. The the state has a lot of these orphaned wells where they don't have identifiable owners. And so the issue when we're talking about this, again, the language is always something that for folks who may not be as deep into the weeds about this issue may not know about. But all orphaned wells are abandoned wells, which means that the equipment is no longer there. You can no longer there's a definition for what an abandoned well means, but not all abandoned wells are orphaned wells, which means that what we're talking about when we're talking about abandoned wells is wells that we have identifiable owners responsible for the well that are still active, that are financially viable, that we can pin to that this is your well and your responsibility to take care of. So I do just want to name that because things have gotten a little convoluted with federal money around for plugging funds right now through the IIJA. So I did just want to mention that. I also wanted to mention that pre-act wells in Pennsylvania, which is, again, more things on our books, more things out there that we are just contending with in Pennsylvania. These wells don't have a bond amount, and they actually account for 60% of our active conventional wells. And that's in that lapsing statement DEP report from Governor Wolf that was already placed in the chat. That's a lot of wells that have no money set aside for plugging. So those already don't even have the small buffer that we'll show you here in just a couple seconds. I did also want to share with folks that despite the fact that we have law on the books that took away a lot of this opportunity to fight this for conventional industry or shallow gas, there is some Act 962 that has been introduced that's trying to give that authority back to the EQB or the Environmental Quality Board to raise those bond amounts. So it's trying to fix what happened last year. I would say it's, things within Harrisburg are definitely split. And so it's not expected to go anywhere, but it is an opportunity for us to continue talking about this issue.
Yeah,
so those are the two reminders and things going on that are kind of in the middle of all of this.
It's a very complicated issue. And and so we're going to share with folks later things that people can do. But I also want to mention, so I believe this is the well that's in the Murraysville Park.
Yep.
This is a community park, and you can see this tube that's coming out of the bottom of the well. It's just bent. And that's been leaking for forever.
Yeah.
And actually, if you go onto EarthWorks YouTube, which we're gonna play some footage from EarthWorks YouTube and from our YouTube a little later, but we actually went out with the FLIR camera, which is a special gas imaging camera, to see exactly what this was doing. And it's just weird to see it kind of like spewing its stuff. And again, it's not just gas, it's things, it can be things like carcinogens, like benzene that's coming out of that pipe that is located in a park where people recreate. So if we go to the next slide. There we go. So tell us a little bit about this, Kelsey.
Okay, so when we had our expert report done, part of what we petitioned on is the actual cost of what it estimates to plug these different wells. And so you can see right now where the frac well current bond amount is between 4 to 10, the actual estimated costs are upwards of $83,000. And so this is what I'm talking about when I say our bonds don't cover the cost of plugging. The conventional industry over here, the one that we can no longer act on and have been, our petition has been halted, you're looking at an actual cost of estimates of $38,000 with a current bond amount of $2,500. And I would say even depending on how the well is situated, the cost to plug those wells can actually be much higher. In many emergency situations, they can be upwards of $100,000, depending on how that well is interacting with the surroundings or what else is going on. And so I think that this is really interesting because, again, there's just nowhere near the actual cost of plug. And so when you think about that security deposit thing, that analogy that I had talked about earlier, this is not an active thing to be encouraging good stewardship of your own resources. And we have nothing to tie folks to their own assets. They can just regularly abandon them to us. And we have to sit around and wait for notices of violations and then court procedures and long sort of withstanding processes that don't actually get to plugging a well faster. And I think that this is sort of where if more capital is tied up within a bond amount that they can get back if they plug this, that is kind of your incentive. And again, it also provides DEP with the means to take care of this well if it does fall back to them much faster. So yeah, just wanted to highlight. I know that this graph isn't to scale for sure, but I do think it's a helpful comparison when we consider just how much this actually cost.
Yeah, for sure. And if you go to the next screen, we're going to talk about, all right, so
Yeah.
up in the corner here. Go ahead.
The effects to us, we talked about leaking methane and we talked about different carcinogens that are also coming out of this. Volatile organic compounds are definitely coming out of these wells. And you also have potential contamination to groundwater supplies or gas leaking to the surface through your water within this area. Abandoned wells also decrease your property values. So coming back, hitting us even more in terms of a taxpayer, local tax base conversation, as well as the cost to clean up when operators abandon their own assets, when they literally turn their wells back over to the state, it becomes a state problem and it becomes state taxpayer money and funding that with our own tax dollars. So these are just some of the real ways of which abandoned wells impact us. And like Jillian had said earlier, there are lots of conventional wells in general. So we're also talking about these sorts of things if you're dealing with malfunctions. So you're also, gas infrastructure overall has consequences with being close to it. And so wanting to name that abandoned wells are a subset of this. But again, we're going to see some footage later of some active wells that are also problematic when you're not actually taking proper care of them. And many of those active wells, that were, like we talked about, don't have bonds. So when they do reach the end of their lifespan, or when they do finally, just reach that non-productive window, there's no money set aside that operators were required to take care of those. So they could just still sit there for until they get notices of violations, until they get being told, to take care of that. So I think that this is another aspect of where we're thinking about, okay, abandoned wells are stuff that's already out there, already abandoned, already not producing, but we still have a lot of wells that are producing, but they're not producing very much. And so all of those wells within that 10-year window where we can't adjust bond amounts is a very likely thing that we'll see a lot of abandonment, just in terms of a window that's opportune for folks who don't have to take care of them. There's nothing holding them to that asset in such a way outside of violations, but not like their own capital.
Yeah, so it sounds like it makes good economic sense to do this. It sounds like it makes good sense for the people that own property, that with a well on their property. And so what do you think are the motivations behind, and maybe this is getting too much into the weeds or trying to assume that we know like what people are thinking, but what do you think are some of the reasons why the petition didn't go through and the bond amounts weren't passed?
Goodness. I mean, I would say first, gas industry has a lot of power as a be in the state of Pennsylvania. We're the second largest producer of gas in the country. And so when it comes to things that are directly in conflict with something that operators don't want to do, like pay for their plugging of their own wells and having higher bond amounts set aside, it's a good industry practice that currently they haven't had to be held to. So I think that when you consider the powers that be within our legislature, I also think that at the particular time that we were dealing with this, there were deals and conversations that were being made in exchange. And so this is where you get into things like how, and I don't pretend to know how all of this stuff works out in the day to day, but there are deals that are struck in Harrisburg, and there are ways of which, concessions on one side of things and concessions on the other side kind of merge. And a lot of times you'll see environmental issues being a part of that. A lot of times you'll see our issues when it comes to environment be on the chopping block or the trades. And I think that that's what we saw last year. And I think that, it's again, what we're kind of seeing play out in Pennsylvania pretty regularly.
Yeah, and I was shocked to recently find out that there's one lobbyists from the oil and gas industry per legislator. So like every legislator in Pennsylvania has an oil and gas lobbyist. I'm thinking to myself, what do they do? Like follow them around all day? What does their day consist of that they're they have to have one per. So it sounds like this industry has a lot of power. And it sounds like that power is that they're taking power away from the people that live here, and money out of their pockets, the people that live here, to be able to do business, which doesn't seem right to me. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but it doesn't seem like it's right that taxpayers now and in the future too. We're not just talking about now, we're talking about decades from now, we're still going to be dealing with this issue, just like mining, kind of going back to that mining argument.
Yeah, and I think even when you were talking about that plugged well in the Murraysville Park that we were at last year, plugging is one way to reduce a lot of these potential issues that we're talking about. But over time, plugs still have to be replugged. And I do think that this is one of those things that both monitoring of sites and also making sure that our plugging standards are updated and making sure that we have the workforce to do that kind of work as well is really important. And I do see efforts being made to address some of that with federal dollars, but I also see ways in which, we have abandoned wells with known operators who are getting those wells plugged through federal dollars, despite the fact that it's meant to be an orphan well plugging program. And we've got folks who are getting their own wells plugged, and kind of in retrospect, they're supposed to be going, DEP is supposed to be going after that money, right, in retrospect. But like, it's up to us to also kind of be watchdogging all these kinds of things. And I think that that's a lot of pressure for a lot of us who are kind of just also, like I said, we've talked about a lot of confusing things in here, like a lot of confusing industry language. And what's not confusing is when we have video footage and photos and things like what we're about to show y'all, is that like, this is where it gets a little bit more concrete for us to just see how these things are impacting us and where they're located and on a day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to kind of give folks an idea, so these are active conventional wells. We were out with our friends at EarthWorks. You can see Melissa there. She's been on previous lunch and learns with us with her the gas imaging camera. And this is the one on the left. That well is in a park in Monroeville, right behind the soccer field and the ball fields. And then the one on the right-hand side is right behind my kid's school. I mean, literally, a couple 100 feet behind where the kids go out for lunch. After lunch, they go out to play in the parking lot. And you can see this infrastructure is really rusty. Luckily, the one in the Monroeville one, we did not find leaking this time. That was one that we had kept an eye on from previous things, but the one behind my kid's school has been leaking every single time we go out to check it, which is like 3 years in a row. It's leaking. So, and this is, again, can be emitting benzene, which we know is a known carcinogen, which we know can be harmful to humans, particularly kids. And it's located right behind their school. So we're going to actually show some video in the next slide. We're hoping that the sound will work. Corey may have to unmute himself, but go ahead and try to and actually this one might not even have sound, which is good. So this is actually the video of that well behind my kid's school. So this is Penn Trafford. That's the school, Trafford Middle School and Elementary. That's where they go to school. And you can see that's the cafeteria, those double doors back there. And this is right behind the school. And we had been here several times to look at this particular well. And that is with the gas imaging camera. So it's leaking. And it was leaking all 3 times. And so this to me is pretty startling. And I was luckily, thanks to the video from EarthWorks, we were able to send this video to the administration, and we let them know, like, hey, this is leaking right outside your door. And so, I know as a parent, it concerns me, and so we're going to be hopefully doing some stuff in the future to try to advocate for them to do something with this well. But if you are a parent and the next time you go to your kid's school, look to see if there's anything like that behind your kid's school, to see if it might be leaking. And the next time we come out, when EarthWorks is here next in our neck of the woods, we will we can make a list of things that we want to look at. And so if we go to the next slide, the next video, which I think we might have to exit out of this, and then and we also have a something in the chat. We're going to try to play the video, and hopefully the sound works here. No, it's not working. So Corey, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, let me know if it works.
Okay. No. I'm Jillian Graver. We're out here today with...
It is working?
Yep.
Okay.
We can hear the sound. It's a terrible face I'm making.
Ah.
This is Kelsey. There we go. I'm Jillian Graver. We're out here today with Sierra Club and EarthWorks. We just went to hike in the woods, and we could smell a really strong odor. We were with the kids today, so we actually turned back. And the kids are not going to go on the hike with us. And actually, I'm not going to go on the hike either. And folks from EarthWorks can kind of explain their equipment a little bit, but they're going to come and take some FLIR footage of the leaks.
We're at Boyce Park, checking it out to see if there are methane leaks. And as soon as we walked into the park, we smelled a very, very strong odor. It's so strong that I actually went back to our car and put on this respirator to protect me from the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, which are hazardous to health. And this is a community park. We just saw a runner in here. People are breathing this stuff in, so it needs to be addressed. And after I capture a video of it with my optical gas imaging camera, I'm gonna file a complaint with DEP to let them know about the situation, because it needs to be addressed. It's a very bad situation in there.
Yeah, and so what does the camera do?
So the camera is able to see normally invisible compounds. So that would be methane, which is terrible for the climate, and volatile organic compounds, which are hazardous to health and can even cause cancer. It is specially calibrated. It's a very specific type of camera. It's used by the oil and gas industry and by regulators to look for gas leaks because of the way that it's calibrated using infrared.
Hopefully we can get some type of action because people are in this park all the time, walking on this beautiful trail. There's a beautiful little creek that runs through the trail that you can walk over, and just a really peaceful, wonderful place to be. And in our Allegheny parks here in Allegheny County, we want to try to preserve these parks. We want to try to make them as safe as we possibly can. And this is preventing that from happening. Yeah, and actually, because of that video and the folks that showed up at the courthouse, there were some really positive actions to not allow this to happen anymore in Allegheny County parks. So that's really great action as a part of the work that we did that day. And we see Melissa with her respirator, and Kelsey, you were there. It was so potent, that smell. And so this was an active conventional well. So luckily we got a great result out of this. So we were able to contact the operator, and then really the next day they came out and fixed it. Now, if there was no operator, or if the well was, we couldn't contact the operator, or if the operator went out of business, that would be leaking to this day. In a park where people are recreating, people are walking their dogs, biking. And so, this kind of really highlights the importance of action now. Kelsey, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, like, when we were out there looking for in the parks for this particular outing, we were actually searching for an abandoned well that was on the premises, and then we came across this active well that was smelling. And this was not, I had surveyed this particular trail, maybe like a month and a half prior to holding this outing, to make sure that I knew the terrain, that I could communicate appropriately to everybody who was going to come out that day, what it was going to be like on that trail on our hike. And this was not smelling a month and a half prior to this. So I do think that, when it comes to monitoring, when it comes to being aware of what's in your own communities and what's also like in your backyard at your schools, these are the kinds of things that can change pretty frequently and or like quickly. And being able to get them called up and addressed is really important. And also, again, just based off of the smell, it was making my eyes burn. And you'll actually hear my reactions to it in this next video if we play. But I do want to throw out a disclaimer. We didn't know, we hadn't seen the well at this point where I'm giving this reaction. So I didn't know it was an active well that we were even looking at. I didn't go back to the site of the particular area. But once we realized it was an active well, that actually was able to get addressed. But again, we were looking for an abandoned well that was in the same vicinity. But you can just hear my reactions to even being out there and experiencing this, as Jillian has just talked about as well.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and play this. Hey, this is Kelsey Krepps.
Hi.
Say hi, Kelsey.
Hey.
You want to talk about why we're here today?
Yeah, so this is part of an outing that we were doing that's scouting out different conventional well pieces of infrastructure, particularly abandoned wells that are in our public parks. And there is, according to a couple of maps that we have going on, an abandoned well located within this park right by the Log House Trail that has not been plugged properly. And we were back there just a few seconds ago, well, a few minutes ago. Technically the walk is a little bit longer than that. And really just immediately started to smell the just kind of sulfury aspects of that. The back of my throat started to feel a little, honestly, just feels like it's coated right now. And what we were told by our friends at EarthWorks, who have a camera out here today looking for methane emissions, is basically that it's definitely leaking. And they actually went back to their car to get a volatile organic compound tool. I'm not exactly sure the name of it, I apologize, but yeah, it's really leaking back there today. And this isn't the only park that we have these kinds of pieces of infrastructure in. Earlier today, we were over in a park in Murraysville, which is close by, and we're next to a plugged well, and it still was leaking. And so this is just kind of talking about the importance of making sure that these wells, number one, are properly plugged. Number two, that they are properly plugged by the people who are responsible for them, which is with an abandoned well that still has a viable owner. And third of all, one of the biggest things that we all have been working on is raising bond amounts for these wells, which is the financial ties to these wells. So companies can't just leave them in the back of the woods. They have to plug them, and then they can get money back from those original bonds to after they've done that. But a lot of the times our bond amounts are too low, and so it's more advantageous for companies to just leave their assets in the middle of the woods, leaving us to smell it, leaving us to clean it up as taxpayers in the state, and instead of getting the financial ties back to it. So I hope I did a quick job of explaining that.
And I just want to, make note of for everybody, we had kids here today. We were hoping to go on a little hike, but unfortunately, I just think it's too strong for the kids to smell. We're going to talk next to Melissa. Yeah, so that was that same day. We went to Murraysville, and we have a really great question in our chat. I popped it in here. And the question is, as the municipal oil and gas ordinances for protect the public are written, is there a formula that can be worked into them to cover the proper bonding amounts? That's a really great question. Kelsey, do you know?
I don't off the top of my head, in all honesty. I don't do a lot of ordinance work, but I would be happy to look more into this because I do think that as folks are working at this on their local levels, if that's an opportunity that I could be providing or helpful with, I think that would be a really great tool. But at the top of my head, I honestly don't know, y'all, so I apologize, but I can look into it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I think that that's something that, that is important to note too, that, while these things happen and the state has certain oversight, we talk a lot about local ordinances and, things that people can do at the local level. And so there might be opportunities at the local level for people for local governments to get involved. And that would be great, right? Because they know better than anybody what's in their backyard. I think this is really great, and I really appreciate you coming today and talking about like the update and everything, and giving us this information, because nothing happens quickly in government, as we have found out the last 8 years of doing the work we're doing. Nothing happens quickly, and so if we go to the next slide, we just wanted to share with everybody here that's here today and that watches us later, that there will be other things that folks can do. And I'm going to move us over here in this corner. So, Kelsey, do you want to go over this a little bit and we can talk about what people can do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will just let folks know that despite things going on when it comes to, where things are at for the conventional petition that we were all working on, we are exploring other legal options. Don't have anything to announce just yet with y'all, but just know that we've got folks looking into it. We're definitely still planning some outings to other wells that are abandoned. We would have to do some scouting projects to make sure that those things are safe. And even, like I said before, I had scouted this particular trail. And so even in a span of about a month and a half, situations can change. So definitely making sure that we do a little bit more outing stuff close to the date is something that I've learned from doing this work over time. But I'm still planning outings, and I'm still planning on showcasing and having our folks over at EarthWorks also out in the field with me later this summer. So you'll see some of that. Volunteer teams, just get in contact with me. I'm trying to work on some volunteer teams of who are really interested about this particular issue, or who are impacted by this particular issue as well. There are a lot of these wells that across our Commonwealth, and so many of us are impacted, or could go check out maps to see how close these things are, or already know about them in your own yard or in your own family farm, or kind of anywhere, downtowns. They're everywhere in Western PA. We are going to be doing an LTE workshop, and so if you're interested in that, there's going to be a sign-up sheet that kind of comes around through here. But talking to your legislators and legislator is another option here. So if any of these sound like something that you would be willing to do or wanting to take action on related to abandoned and orphaned wells, mostly abandoned wells and conventional industry, please fill out this take action that Jillian is dropping into the chat. And the take action button on these slides also features my email, and please feel free to reach out. I'd really love to be talking with y'all and connecting with you on this issue, especially as it's impacting so many of us.
Yeah, so I think that there's hope for folks to and things that they can do. And thank you for going over all the different ways people can get involved. Sometimes if people have never talked to their legislator before, or maybe never read an LTE, there's a lot of resources that we can share and education we can share for folks. So if you fill out the form, which is just the protectpt.info /take action, that will let us know that you're interested in one of these things, either if it's a planned outing. And so the next time we plan something like this, we'll let you know and we'll contact you so you can get involved. It's really, there's a lot of work to still be done to protect the people of Pennsylvania from an industry that wants to just abandon its assets and leave us with the cost of cleaning it up. And so, the work that we do now will benefit our kids, our grandkids, and other future generations. it's kind of exciting to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And honestly, as you're even explaining this, in a wrap up situation, what is happening when folks abandon their wells is literally like a dine and dash, if you think about it. Like, they're putting this, they're taking all of the food, they're having all of the benefits of having these profits. And in the same process, they're not having any of the responsibility and that's coming back to us. And so, Jillian, I know that you've been working on this for so much longer than even I have. And so just all of us are in this together for this fight. And we are going to continue doing that until we can right some of these wrongs that were started up here in Pennsylvania with just this industry running rampant over
Absolutely.
Us.
Yeah. And I mean, look, at the end of the day, this is an issue that our elected officials should be taking care of, right? They are the ones that are making this happen, that they're preventing us from being able to have the resources that we need to do this. So, and it's across the board. It's not one side or another. It's across the board, a bipartisan issue. So if you are one of those folks that really feels like that we as Pennsylvanians shouldn't bear the brunt of the cleanup, then call your legislator. If you're the kind of person that says, there's one in my backyard and I don't know if it's leaking, maybe it smells, call your legislator. If you're concerned about your grandkids, or your kids in the future having to pay for, something that they had no part in the decision making for, call your legislator. You can write an LTE, and you can go on one of our outings with us. And so I want to thank Kelsey for being here today and giving us this update on this really important information that I think is important to all Pennsylvanians, because whether you live near this stuff or not, you're paying the price for it. And you're going to continue to pay the price unless somebody does something. And so we're trying to act, and we want you to act with us. And so, yeah, in closing, Kelsey, do you have any other thoughts or anything else you want to share before we hop off today?
No, I just really appreciate y'all letting me come back and give this update, since things have been happening in the last year and a half. And again, for all of the work that you do on the day-to-day and all of the work that we're doing together on this issue. Just thanks for having me. And folks, please, again, reach out. My email is kelsey.krepps@sierraclub.org. So we're going to keep working on this issue.
Awesome. Yeah. And I put the links to the some of the videos that we saw in the chat. If you go to Protect PT's YouTube, they're all on our local sites playlist. So you can see some of the videos that we took at other places with EarthWorks. You can see the videos that I just shared on this, and lots of other things. We have lots of great content for people to learn more about these issues. Thank you so much, Kelsey, for being a part of this great talk today. And we will see everybody back here next month at our Lunch and Learn. It's the last Tuesday of every month at noon. So that's going to be August 29th at noon, and we'll see you all there. And thanks so much, Kelsey, again, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Take care, y'all.